Dr. Paul Conti.
Paul Conti, MD.
Dr. Paul Conti.
I think often substance abuse is dealt with and thought of as an illness, and in a way the responsibility is kind of taken away. I'm wondering what powers that in people, why there's such a strong synergy between substance abuse and trauma.
Trauma paves the way to substances. So it's our responsibility and for the societies around us that we don't accept the appeal of the short-term soothing.
Intergenerational trauma, so for example, the trauma of the Jewish people and the Holocaust kind of gets passed on.
Children, for example, of Holocaust survivors had higher levels of anxiety, and traumas that are perpetuated during wartime have been seen mostly through a criminal lens. But now that the conception has shifted to say that trauma can affect that person not only for the rest of their lives, but it can affect their children.
This is the Loaf Podcast. Welcome back to the bakery, everyone, where we break bread with the world's finest. Today, we're very lucky to be here with Dr. Paul Conti, a renowned psychiatrist, author of Trauma, the Invisible Epidemic, and the man who saved Lady Gaga's life. Dr. Conti, thank you so much for being here with us today.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you, and thank you for the kind introduction. I appreciate it.
Of course, it's only the truth. So just to begin, the first thing that kind of really struck me reading your book is that trauma is often seen as something that happens in the past. It's an event, but actually what you come to make me understand is that it fundamentally alters our brain functioning and our perception of reality from that point on. People often say there's a world before and after. So could you just unpack how exactly that functions in the brain and the kind of ways it can change people looking at the world?
Sure. I think the first thing we need to do is define trauma, right? Because it's a common word, so it can mean so many things to so many people. The definition of trauma that I'm talking about is something negative that impacts us, and it could be acute, it could be chronic over time, it could even be vicarious, but it rises to the level of overwhelming our coping skills. And then on the other side of that, our brains are different. And when our brains are changed, they behave differently. So for example, if a neutral stimulus comes to us, like a new face, for example, instead of seeing it in a neutral light and assessing from there, we may have an automatic negativity. There are many things that change inside of us, including physical functioning. So functioning of our immune system, for example, can change and predispose us to illnesses. So if the trauma rises to the level of actually changing how our brain functions, then it affects everything in us, physically, mentally, emotionally, behavioral choices. And that's the definition of trauma that I'm choosing because, one, it's a science-based definition, and two, it lets us look at the downstream effects of trauma, which, of course, hopefully leads us to both prevention and even more importantly, of course, treatment and even more importantly, prevention.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of trauma, I wanted to touch on something which is obviously quite personal to you. You've shared in your book and in other places a deeply personal story about your brother's tragic death.
Yes.
And I was wondering how this personal experience with grief and tragedy shaped and developed your own understanding of trauma, maybe beyond purely scientific data.
Sure. Well, at the time that happened, I hadn't gone to medical school. I mean, I graduated from college, but I was in a business career. I mean, I wasn't prepared to understand. Nowhere in my background had I been taught how such a tragedy impacts us. So I could see, of course, that I was supposed to be sad, and I felt sad, but there was so much more than that. I felt guilty. I felt ashamed. I felt like the world was a different place. My whole self-conception from someone who could work hard and achieve and, make a good life for myself really changed. And my judgment and all sorts of decisions changed. And what I was coming to understand was a whole self shift away from things that were more often than not, good and healthy and productive towards a different way of seeing life that was beleaguered and angry and afraid and confused. And I could see that it was driving my life to places that like weren't going to be okay. So that led me to get some help from supportive people around me and ultimately get some treatment. But that was a big stretch. I mean, it wasn't well understood or accepted to get mental health help. So I had to get myself to a place of realizing, hey, this is out here to be had. I don't need to be ashamed of needing help and getting help, and really something just must change in me or I'm in real trouble.
You talk about trauma being the invisible epidemic, and yet you're talking about a time further back when even more so it was unacceptable or considered not normal to do this kind of thing and seek help. Do you see a general positive trend, and what other changes do you see in the way people are talking about and dealing with trauma and mental health more generally?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've come very far in this period of time, which is over a quarter century of time. But I don't think that it's more accepted to get mental health, at least not in most parts of the United States. I've had the good fortune of living in England at one period of time, which was a wonderful experience. But I don't know, I haven't spent much time there now. I don't know how it may have changed, but there are very low levels of resource availability, I think, in both countries, and of course in many, many others too. So the resources are less available. The social situation does not predispose us to understanding, okay, here's what's going on with me. I should get help. It's not like one's knee hurting, right? If your knee hurts and it keeps hurting, like there's something to do about that. There's a certain kind of doctor to see. It's not shameful to go do that. But not a lot has changed. And despite the opiate epidemic, certainly in the United States, and the many, there's countless, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of deaths and the tribulations during the pandemic, we have not done a better job of helping our society understand what trauma is, how it changes us, and how we can get help. It's still often seen to be soft or esoteric. An example I give is that trauma, in the way that I'm describing, the way that makes brain changes, makes us older than our age. So a person can be 20 years old or 30 or 50 by the calendar, but actually inside of them, how quickly our cells age, how quickly we move towards death, we can actually be older than our age. So I don't know if there's a better hard science concept to show that this is valid, and it hurts us throughout life, and it can foreshorten our lives. So I don't think we've understood or appreciated that on a broad level any more than we did a few decades ago.
Ever shown up to the beach with a big bush, getting rejected left, right and centre, so you have to walk away with your pubes between your legs? Then get yourself a Manscaped and rule the beach. Wear your shorts with no shame. Get the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra now with a discount code LOAF to get a full 20% off, so that your baguette leaves no crumbs.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the clip from our interview with Dr. Paul Conti. Drop a like and subscribe for more content. If you have any thoughts, leave a comment down below. If you'd like to check out the full interview, you can click right here. Stay tuned for more.